In 1099, Crusader armies stormed Jerusalem and massacred its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants in one of the bloodiest slaughters of the medieval world. Blood ran ankle-deep in the streets, chroniclers wrote. Women and children were killed without mercy. The city that three faiths called holy was turned into a charnel house by men who believed God was on their side. 88 years later, a Kurdish general took the city back. Not with a massacre. With mercy. His name was Saladin, and he made his enemies write poetry about him. The medieval world was a world of iron rules. You conquered, you slaughtered, you took. Mercy was weakness. Honor was a word men used at banquets and forgot in battle. Into this world came a man who actually believed what he said, a man who held himself to a code so rigidly that his enemies were left with no choice but to admire him. He did not win by being the most brutal. He won by being the most disciplined, the most just, the most human. This is the story of a man born in obscurity who unified a shattered world, defeated the greatest military force of his age, and recaptured the holiest city in 3 religions, without committing a single atrocity. Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. The man who showed the medieval world what honor actually meant. And the proof that the most powerful thing a ruler can wield is not a sword, it is a reputation that even your enemies cannot bring themselves to destroy. When Saladin was born in 1137 in Tikrit, in modern-day Iraq, the Holy Land had been in Crusader hands for nearly 40 years. The First Crusade had carved 4 Crusader states out of the heart of the Islamic world, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. These were not temporary occupations. The Crusaders had built castles, established laws, planted vineyards. They intended to stay forever. The Muslim world that should have expelled them was shattered. The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt followed Shia Islam. The Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad was a shadow of its former self. Syria was divided between competing warlords. Mesopotamia was torn by factional violence. Every Muslim ruler was more concerned with destroying his Muslim rival than with the Crusaders holding Jerusalem. The Holy City had been lost not because the enemy was too strong, but because the defenders could not stop fighting each other long enough to notice. Saladin's father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, was a Kurdish military governor serving the Zengid Sultan Zengi and later his son Nur ad-Din. The family were professionals, soldiers and administrators who served power competently and survived by being indispensable. Saladin grew up in the courts of power, watching how decisions were made, how loyalty was won, how men were motivated. He was not a battlefield prodigy. He was something rarer, a student of human nature who happened to also be physically formidable. As a young man, Saladin showed little interest in military glory. He preferred theology and polo to warfare. Contemporary sources describe him as bookish and gentle in his youth, hardly the description of a future conqueror. His uncle Shirkuh was the military man in the family, a fierce general serving Nur ad-Din of Syria. When Nur ad-Din sent Shirkuh to Egypt on a military mission in 1163, Saladin went along, almost reluctantly, records suggest. He had no idea he was walking into the situation that would make him. Egypt was a prize beyond calculation, the richest country in the medieval world, the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, with a treasury that could fund armies for decades. But the Fatimid Caliphate that ruled it was dying. The Caliph was a child. The real power was held by competing viziers who were more than willing to invite foreign armies in to help them destroy their domestic rivals. Shirkuh and Saladin arrived as allies of one faction. They stayed to take everything. When Shirkuh died suddenly in 1169, just months after becoming vizier of Egypt, power fell to Saladin almost by accident. The Fatimid courtiers who appointed him thought they were choosing the least threatening option, a young, inexperienced nephew who could be controlled. They had made the greatest miscalculation of the century. Within 2 years, Saladin had dismantled the Fatimid Caliphate entirely, ended Shia rule in Egypt, and made himself the master of the richest country in the Islamic world. The reluctant soldier had become the most powerful man in the region. Saladin understood something that no Muslim ruler had grasped in a generation: the Crusader states could never be expelled by a divided Islamic world. Unity was not optional. It was the only path. But unity could not be imposed by force alone. It had to be built on trust, on reputation, on the belief that the man asking for your loyalty was worthy of it. Saladin spent years building exactly that reputation, one kept promise at a time. He moved methodically. Egypt first, secured and loyal. Then Syria, where Nur ad-Din's death left a power vacuum that Saladin filled with a combination of force and diplomacy. Then northern Mesopotamia. Then Yemen. He did not conquer these territories in the way the Crusaders had conquered Jerusalem, with fire and massacre. He absorbed them, incorporated their rulers as subordinates, gave their population stability and justice. His empire grew because joining it seemed more attractive than resisting it. He built as well as conquered. The great citadel of Cairo that still dominates the city's skyline today was begun under Saladin's orders. He expanded and unified Egypt's administrative system, replaced Fatimid officials with his own trusted men, and reformed the tax system to fund his coming campaigns. He was not simply accumulating power for its own sake. He was building the machine that would take Jerusalem back. Every decision, every appointment, every fortress, all pointed toward one day, one city, one reckoning with history. What set Saladin apart from every other ruler of his age, Muslim or Christian, was his absolute personal code of honor. It was not performance. It was not calculated politics. It was genuine. He made promises and kept them when breaking them would have been safer and more profitable. He treated prisoners with dignity when massacre was the norm. He returned gifts sent by enemies. He cared for the sick on both sides of a battle. His men had seen enough rulers to know the difference. They would have followed him anywhere. His faith was not the weaponized religion of the Crusade preachers, the kind that turned massacre into holy duty. It was personal, private, and demanding. He held himself to its standards relentlessly. Contemporary sources describe him as genuinely troubled when circumstances forced him to make harsh decisions. He lost sleep over the fates of individuals in a way that rulers of his era simply did not. His biographer Baha ad-Din, who knew him personally, wrote that Saladin was harder on himself than on anyone else. He gave everything away. Not symbolically, literally. His personal treasury was perpetually empty because he kept giving it to anyone who needed it more. Ambassadors who came to negotiate reported leaving with gifts worth more than they had brought. Soldiers who were wounded received payments from his own pocket. Scholars who visited received stipends. The poor of Cairo knew his name not as a distant sultan but as a man who actually appeared in their streets and actually gave them money. His justice was not an abstraction. It was personal. By 1187, Saladin controlled Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Yemen. The Crusader states were surrounded on every side by his territory. All he needed was a pretext, and the Crusader Lord Raynald of Chitillon provided one. Raynald attacked a Muslim caravan traveling under guarantee of safe passage, a direct violation of the truce between Saladin and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Saladin had warned Raynald before. This time, he simply prepared for war. Saladin's plan for the Battle of Hattin was a masterpiece of strategic psychology. He knew the Crusader army would march to relieve the siege of Tiberias. He knew they would cross waterless terrain in the July heat in full armor. He positioned his forces to cut them off from every water source, surrounding them on the march. The Crusader commanders knew it was a trap. They marched into it anyway, because the alternative was to abandon Tiberias, and the political consequences seemed worse than the military risk. It was the last major decision the Kingdom of Jerusalem would ever make. On July 4, 1187, the Crusader army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the largest force the Crusader states had ever assembled, was annihilated at Hattin. Dying of thirst, unable to form effective formations, choked by smoke from grass fires Saladin had ordered lit, they were cut down almost to a man. The true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, was captured. The King of Jerusalem was taken prisoner. In a single afternoon, the military power of the Crusader kingdom was ended. Jerusalem was now defenseless. On October 2, 1187, Saladin stood before Jerusalem. The city that had been taken from the Islamic world in a massacre 88 years earlier was his to retake. His soldiers remembered what the Crusaders had done in 1099. The blood of their ancestors had run in these same streets. He had every precedent, every religious justification, and every military right to answer massacre with massacre. He did not. The terms Saladin offered were extraordinary by any standard of the medieval world. Every Christian who could pay a ransom of 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, 1 for a child, would be freed. Those who could not pay, Saladin paid for them himself. His brother Saladin paid for 1,000 more. The city's Christian population was escorted safely to Crusader territory. Not one was killed. Not one church was burned. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in Christianity, was locked and then handed back to its Christian keepers. When the news reached Europe, the reaction was disbelief followed by something harder to admit, shame. Christian chroniclers who had celebrated the massacre of 1099 as gods will now had to report that the Muslim Sultan who took the city back had behaved with more Christian charity than the Christians themselves had shown. Some simply refused to report the mercy accurately. Others invented atrocities that never happened. The truth was too uncomfortable, that their enemy had demonstrated a civilization they could not match. Europe's response to the fall of Jerusalem was the Third Crusade, the most formidable crusading force ever assembled. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa marched overland with a vast German army. Philip of France and Richard of England sailed with their combined fleets. 3 of the most powerful monarchs in Christendom were coming to take Jerusalem back. And they were bringing everything they had. Saladin had just unified the Islamic world and recaptured Jerusalem. Now he had to defend it against the most powerful crusading army in history. Frederick Barbarossa drowned crossing a river in Anatolia, eliminating the German army before it arrived. But Richard of England was something else entirely. He was, by any measure, the finest battlefield commander of his generation. And unlike most Crusader commanders, he was not impulsive. He was patient, methodical, and relentlessly effective. At the Battle of Arsuf in 1191, Richard demonstrated exactly why he was dangerous. Saladin had expected the Crusader formation to break under constant attack. His cavalry had been harassing them for hours. Instead, the Crusaders held their formation with iron discipline until the precise moment Richard chose to counterattack. The Crusader charge was devastating. It was the first time Saladin's forces had been clearly outmaneuvered in a pitched battle. Saladin retreated. He had met his equal. What developed between Saladin and Richard during the Third Crusade was one of history's most remarkable relationships between enemies. They never met in person. Richard requested meetings and Saladin declined, arguing that great kings should not meet until peace was agreed, because seeing each other and then fighting would be dishonorable. But they exchanged messages, gifts, and gestures of respect with a frequency and warmth that shocked both their armies. When Richard fell ill with fever, Saladin sent him fresh fruit and ice brought from the mountains, an extraordinary gesture toward an enemy who was trying to take Jerusalem from him. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin sent him 2 replacement horses. When a Crusader knight's horse was killed mid-charge and he was left on foot, Saladin's soldiers were reportedly ordered not to kill him, on Saladin's personal instruction. His honor extended even to the enemy. Especially to the enemy. The Third Crusade ended in stalemate. Richard could not take Jerusalem. He came within sight of it twice and turned back both times, knowing he could take the city but not hold it. Saladin could not expel the Crusaders from the coast. The Treaty of Jaffa in 1192 gave Christians access to Jerusalem as pilgrims while leaving the city under Muslim control. It was not the victory either man had sought. But it was an agreement both men could honor. And both men did. Between campaigns, Saladin governed. And how he governed was as remarkable as how he fought. He held open court twice a week where any of his subjects, from the highest nobleman to the poorest farmer, could bring a grievance directly to him. He heard the cases personally. He ruled on them personally. He was famous for ruling against his own officials when the facts warranted it, and for this his people trusted him in a way that subjects rarely trusted medieval rulers. His mercy was not reserved for dramatic moments. It was constant, consistent, and often expensive. He released prisoners who could not pay ransom, costing him revenues his treasury desperately needed. He kept promises to enemies when breaking them would have been militarily advantageous. He protected Christian and Jewish civilians in territories he conquered, guaranteeing their safety with his personal word. In an age when such guarantees were routinely broken, his were never violated. Not once. He was a patron of learning in an age that desperately needed it. Scholars, poets, theologians, and philosophers gathered at his court. He funded hospitals, schools, and mosques across his empire. He rebuilt the infrastructure of Jerusalem, water systems, markets, religious institutions, after decades of Crusader rule had neglected them. He was building a civilization, not just an empire. And he understood the difference. The years after the Third Crusade were hard ones for Saladin. He was in his mid-50s, old for a man who had spent 30 years in the field, and his health was failing. He had given everything to his empire and his campaigns, and his body was presenting the bill. He continued to govern, continued to hear cases in open court, continued to give away money he did not have. He had unified a shattered world and he was determined to hold it together as long as he could. He never stopped building. Even as his health declined, he oversaw the construction of new educational institutions, hospitals, and religious foundations across Syria and Egypt. He was thinking beyond his own reign, trying to create institutions that would outlast him, that would give his empire the structural foundations to survive the inevitable chaos of succession. He had seen enough of history to know that empires built only on one man's personality died with that man. He was trying to build something that would not. In March 1193, Saladin died in Damascus. He was 55 years old. His treasury contained 1 gold piece and 40 silver coins. He had given everything else away, to his soldiers, to the poor, to the institutions he had built, to strangers who needed it more than he did. He owned no land. He had no estate to leave his family. He left them only his name. And that name, in the Islamic world and in Christian Europe alike, had become synonymous with the highest ideal of what a ruler could be. The most extraordinary testimony to Saladin's character came from his enemies. Christian chroniclers who had every reason to demonize him could not bring themselves to do it. The English chronicler who wrote about the Third Crusade described him as generous, merciful, and just. The French sources called him the greatest ruler of his age. Dante Alighieri, writing a century after Saladin's death, placed him in limbo alongside the great virtuous pagans, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, as one of the noble souls too honorable for hell but born before Christianity could save them. His physical legacy endured. The citadel of Cairo he built still stands, still dominates the Cairo skyline, still visible from miles away exactly as he intended. The institutions he founded, hospitals, schools, religious endowments, shaped Egyptian and Syrian society for centuries. The unified Islamic world he created held together for generations after his death, giving the region a stability it had not known in a century and would not know again for centuries after the Mongols arrived. Richard the Lionheart, on his return to England, was asked about Saladin. He said, according to accounts that have come down through the centuries, that Saladin was the greatest prince in the Islamic world, generous, valiant, and magnanimous. He said it without bitterness, without qualification. The man who had spent 2 years trying to take Jerusalem from Saladin acknowledged that his opponent had bested him not just on the battlefield but in every quality that a ruler should possess. It was the most honest verdict ever delivered on a medieval ruler by his greatest enemy. Jerusalem today still contains the buildings Saladin chose not to destroy. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre still stands because he ordered it protected. The city's Christian and Jewish communities survived his conquest because he guaranteed their safety and kept his word. He could have erased 800 years of evidence and did not. His restraint was itself a monument, more lasting than any stone he could have raised. In the Islamic world, Saladin is the gold standard, the ruler every subsequent leader has been measured against and almost none have matched. In the West, he remains the only enemy commander in the crusading wars who is remembered with admiration rather than fear. His story has been told continuously for 800 years because it does not require exaggeration. The truth of what he did is already extraordinary. A man who had the power to be cruel and chose to be just. A man who had the right to take revenge and chose mercy. A man who died with 1 gold piece in his treasury because he had given everything else away. Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. The man who showed a brutal age that honor was not weakness but the most demanding discipline a human being could impose on themselves. He built no monument to himself. He needed none. The monuments he built were the promises he kept, the lives he spared, the mercy he chose when cruelty was easier. 8 centuries later, his enemies still cannot find the words to diminish him. The most powerful tribute the medieval world ever paid to any man, and it came entirely from those who were trying to defeat him.